Just give me a moment. It's preparing. Do you see it?
What does it say?
No.
Okay, yeah, this is on my screen. Okay. Just 1 second. Let me mute this. Okay, now it's muted. And I will share my screen now and mute everybody.
All users.
Yes. Sorry, the beginning of this recording isn't going to be that. So mute all, and then I'm going to share my screen. And I have a PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. Hold on. Can you see my screen? Hello? Oh, you can't hear me, I forgot.
We can hear you, Eli.
Okay, great. So do you see the whirling dervishes? I can't see if you're raising your hand, but I promised I would start with an image of the whirling dervishes, and Lenny, and I went for coolness instead of clearness. I'm sorry about that, but I think you could see in the center there are the whirling dervishes. And I think I've said this before, this all started with a discussion between Lenny and I. Lenny showed me an image of the whirling dervishes, and I immediately had a kind of a connection with years ago when I was teaching the class Medieval China and Central Asia, and we were talking about a dance in 8th century China and the Silk Road. It was known as the Sogdian Whirl. And that same evening, I put together a PowerPoint. I got kind of obsessed with putting together these slides. So much of this slideshow comes from that original conversation. So this talk, it's not so much going to be the history of the whirling dervishes. It's more about connections between the whirling dervishes, this dance, this ecstatic dance that you see in modern day Turkey, as well as other areas of the Muslim world. But what I hope to do is show that there is this connection between whirling dervishes and this earlier dance known as the Sogdian Whirl. So get ready for whirling dervishes, Silk Road empires, and ecstatic dance in the Hasidic tradition. And one thing, if you are raising your hand, I can't see you because all I see is my screen here. My PowerPoint. So some of the connections I hope to show. So I will trace this dance back to a dance known in 8th century China during a dynasty in China known as the Tang Dynasty. That's roughly from the 7th to the 10th century. And during this period in the 8th century, China had a great deal of influence on the Silk Road. And I'll talk more about the Silk Road. There were also Jews living in the Silk Road. Silk Road, very diverse area, especially during that time of the Tang Dynasty. Interesting, when I was practicing last night, I saw my image in the corner, and I don't see that now. So I just see my screen. I'm very sorry about that. But generally, the whirling dervishes, they trace back to a figure known as Rumi. If I could see you, I would ask how many of you are familiar with Rumi, but I can't see anybody now. And yeah, so, but Rumi, he lived he was born in Afghanistan, but he lived along the Silk Road, and in specific areas where this dance that we call the Sogdian whirl was popular in earlier times. So anyway, I will, at the end, I will make my loosest connections to Hasidism, and the connection there, the Hasidic movement, especially the early Hasidic movement, really emphasized dance and music as part of their this kind of mystical experience. So, can I stop for a second? No, I can't stop for a second. Sometimes my computer just locks up and it's not moving to the next slide. Hold on. Oh, whoa. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I found this plug-in for PowerPoint where you can make timelines. So those connections that I just showed, here you see them in kind of a timeline form. And part of the point of these connections I'm going to make, these are different empires, the Tang Empire, there's the Abbasid Caliphate, the Mongol Empire, the Ottoman, and the Russian Empire. And you know, one of the points I'm going to make, or I am making right now, is that there was a great deal of exchange and the spread of knowledge and culture because of these empires. There was a lot of bad that was there as part of these different empires, like warfare, a lot of deaths in the formation of the empires. But once they were established, there's kind of this flow of trade and ideas and religion and, as I will say, dance as well. I have one slide that shows this spread of kind of ravioli type, pierogi type foods that kind of spread across Asia and Europe as a result of the Mongol Empire, but I will get to that. So I'm tracing this dance back to the what's known as the Tang Dynasty, and just back to that, you see, the laser pointer. Lenny, are you letting Carol in? So the Tang Empire, that's this period from the 7th century to the 10th century in Chinese history. And why I'm bringing up the Tang, there was this dance, as I said, known as the Sogdian whirl. And I will say more about who the Sogdians were. But first, the Tang Dynasty. Again, I can't see you, I'm sorry, but perhaps some of you have been to Xi'an. I kind of see imaginary hands. Hopefully somebody here has been to Xi'an, but that's the modern city in China that goes back to Chang'an, which was the Tang Dynasty capital. That was the biggest, that was the most populated city in the world during the Tang period. And there were peoples coming from all over Asia, especially along the Silk Road, to the Tang capital. It was like a very cosmopolitan world. But there was also this people known as the Sogdians, and there must be a Sogdian on this camel here. But the Sogdians, as I will point out, they were kind of the masters of the trade along the Silk Road in Central Asia. They sort of controlled these market towns in Central Asia, places like you might have heard of Samarkand, Bukhara, Tashkent, well, as we'll find out in a moment, they were also famous for this dance, this whirling dance. But before I get to the Sogdians, you see this image in the corner here? See? And I'm sorry for the X-rated image there, but that's a statue of Lady Yang, the favorite consort of the Tang Dynasty emperor.
Hey, Eli,
Yes.
we can't, our screens are gray. We can't see anything.
You can't see anything.
No, I see you on the side because I have you up there, but the screen is just gray.
Gray?
There's no image. Yeah.
Can you see anything now?
Yeah, but it's very big, so we can only see like a quarter of.
We're
Oh.
seeing,
There we go.
There.
That's better.
What about now? Can you see?
Yes,
Or is it?
Yes.
it's much
Oh.
better now.
So you couldn't see the timeline?
No,
Yes.
we saw
Oh.
the timeline, and but
Okay,
we
can you
didn't
see this? The
X-rated
Tang
image.
Dynasty, the Silk Road, and the Sogdians?
Now we can see.
Ugh.
yeah,
Wow.
when you zoomed in, when you zoomed back out, it lost it.
Okay, I didn't think but you see the whole image now.
It's all image now.
Okay, that's perfect. Do I appear at all in this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm one of the figures on the camel.
Okay, good.
You see this figure in the corner there, in the bottom corner. Let me get hopefully it's not when I do the list. So you see this figure here? I know you were all waiting for the X-rated statue that you couldn't. But this statue in the corner, that's Lady Yang, the favorite consort of the emperor. He kind of had his whole harem. But Lady Yang, she was known as the favorite consort of the this emperor Xuanzong, and he was so in love with her, according to the poets and the kind of later histories. He was so in love with her that he kind of stopped kind of focusing on the rule of the empire, and as a result, there was this major rebellion. So that kind of story, the Chinese historians, they put so much of the blame for this big rebellion on Lady Yang here. And I'm introducing her for a big reason. She was one person in Tang Dynasty China who could dance this, what was known as the Sogdian whirl. And her adopted son, this figure, An Lushan, he was a Turkish and Sogdian figure. He was also well known for the Sogdian whirl, but he ended up launching this major rebellion that almost led to the end of the Tang Dynasty. But for now, if you have any questions about Lady Yang, I can come back to her. She's immortalized in Tang Dynasty poems, in the histories, and she's also known as one of the four beauties of Chinese history.
Eli, are we
Yes.
supposed to be able to see her son? Because he's not on the screen.
He's not in, no, I just mentioned him.
Okay,
So
Fine.
Lady Yang, her adopted son, he becomes this very powerful general. Her brother becomes a very powerful figure at court. For now, Lady Yang and her adopted son, they were famous also for the Sogdian whirl. And here are some images of Sogdians and their Sogdian whirl. Do you see the laser pointer?
No.
Can you see the laser pointer moving? Oh,
Yes.
yes. So here's a Sogdian in his whirling dance. Here's a Sogdian. Here's the whirling dance in different, actually this image here on the right, that's even pre-Tang Dynasty. So that dance was already known before the 8th, 7th century, going back, you know, a few hundred years before that. And here you have Buddhist art from the Silk Road. These are kind of Buddhist deities. You know, they're kind of heavenly figures, but they're doing the Sogdian whirl as well. So, and then you even have some poems from the Tang Dynasty, Chinese poems. One famous, incredibly famous poet of the day, Bo Ju-yi from the 8th century, he became like the rock star Chinese poet in the Japanese world after this time, if there were actually rock stars in 8th, 9th century Japan. But anyway, Bo Ju-yi, he was very famous poet throughout throughout East Asia during this period. And he's also known for a very long poem called The Song of Everlasting Sorrow, which is one of the main depictions of this love between the emperor and Lady Yang. But he also has this poem about the Sogdian whirl. And I forgot to mention, the Sogdians, they were a Persian-speaking people, Iranian people that lived along the Silk Road, and yeah, they were major traders along the Silk Road, but they were also there were many Sogdians living in the Tang Dynasty capital, which, you know, at its height in the Tang Dynasty, there were like in the whole area in and around the capital, there were probably 2 million people. It was by far the most populated city in the world then. But I'll read the poem, Iranian Whirling Girl. So Iranian, that's specifically the Sogdians. Iranian Whirling Girl, Iranian Whirling Girl. At the sound of the string and drums, she raises her arms. Like swirling snowflakes tossed about, she turns in her twirling dance. Whirling to the left, turning to the right, she never feels exhausted. 1,000 rounds, 10,000 circuits, it never seems to end. Compared to her, the wheels of a racing chariot revolve slowly and a whirlwind is sluggish. Iranian Whirling Girl, you came from Sogdiana. And I'll show you in a moment where Sogdiana was, but that's essentially what's now Central Asia, these countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and their kind of main trade center was the city Samarkand, which, at least for me, it kind of conjures up these kind of I don't know, almost mythical, magical images, like Arabian Nights kind of images. So Sogdiana, we will come back to. One more poem from the 9th century. The Iranian from Tashkent appears young. He dances to the music, holding the wine goblet, as rapid as a bird. He wears a cloth cap of foreign make, empty and pointed at the top. His Iranian robe of fine felt has tight sleeves. So one thing, so this dance, it's kind of associated with this area that's now Central Asia, Uzbekistan, but it was popular, the dance was popular all along the Silk Road, and especially popular in the Tang capital and the court. The emperor, and you know, he loved this dance, and so it's where the whirling dervishes. That's a religious dance. This didn't necessarily only have religious connotations. Back in 8th, 9th century China, it was like a form of entertainment. You know, he dances to the music holding the wine goblet, as rapid as a bird. So I've been seen doing this dance before with a wine goblet as well, but that was a joke. So you just encountered, so I mentioned Samarkand. That was sort of you see my pointer? Why don't we do this? I'll do a pen. But my pen just, hold on. Ah! I'll go back to the laser pointer. The pen didn't work. Sorry, everybody, the pen didn't work. So you see this area here, Samarkand, Tashkent. Tashkent was especially known for the dance, the Sogdian whirl. So these Sogdian figures, known in the poem as Iranian, they traveled all the way from Samarkand, Tashkent. Here you see Bukhara. They traveled all the way to the Tang Dynasty capital here in China. I hope you can all see the laser pointer, otherwise, do you see it? See, it's whirling. But Tashkent.
We can see it.
What's that? You can see it, good. Tashkent, again, keep these towns in mind. I will come back to them. Tashkent, Samarkand, Bukhara. During the beginning of the 8th century, the Tang Dynasty China really dominated this area. So there's a very strong Chinese presence in this area as well. But just stepping back for a moment, this whole region all the way from, you know, where the laser pointer is, all the way to here, Samarkand, Tashkent, that had been conquered, you know, going back hundreds of years to, you could say, biblical times. That was conquered by Cyrus the Great. There was this vast Persian Empire. And, you know, so when we read Esther, and that Esther story that begins talking about the extent of the Persian Empire under, what was it, either the son or grandson of Cyrus the Great. You know, it's this vast area, and it really was as vast as it's represented in that in the book of Esther. After that, this whole region was conquered by Alexander the Great. So, you know, this area has a long history of different peoples moving about. Later on, it comes to be known as the Silk Road. But going back to 7th, 8th century China, when China dominates this region, there were all kinds of religions there. There was Buddhism passed through this area. There was Indian religion, Hinduism. The original religion there was, you might be familiar with Zoroastrianism, which was the original religion that had the whole battle between light versus darkness, or good versus evil, and influenced Judaism a lot. But there were also Jews living along the Silk Road as well. So Bukhara, to this day, there are still Jewish communities in Bukhara. But other areas of the Silk Road, there were even Jewish communities in the Tang capital. So here's another map. Yes?
Have all the names of these places changed as they, through the conquering?
Some names have changed, but like Samarkand, that's still a city in Uzbekistan. Bukhara, that's still known in Uzbekistan. You can read about the Bukharan Jews, for instance. I think a lot have left that area, but there are still communities of Jews there. So yes, some names have changed. Some are still known by the same names.
Eli,
Yes.
there's a famous poem, in Samarkand did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. So this is during the.
And that's a Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem, but it's
Right.
it's not. Is it Samarkand?
I'd have to look.
Right, but that's a what's as Coleridge. He was reading a book about Kublai Khan's capital. But yeah, there's a long story that we could go into about that. He was drinking laudanum, which was morphine and alcohol. He was drinking it for some kind of pain, and he fell asleep, had a crazy dream, and then wrote that poem down. But Samarkand is known in a lot of different writings, later writings. But just one point about the Silk Road, there wasn't actually one road. Hopefully that's not crushing your world. There wasn't one road. There were many different trade routes through this area. And, you know, also in the, 18th, 19th century, there was a German, a German who kind of envisioned a train going all the way to China, and he kind of envisioned a single road. So I always say this when I teach in my classes. You might not find this funny, but people weren't actually getting in their Ferraris and driving on the Silk Road. And most of the trade, it wasn't like this kind of long distance trade. It was like, you know, there was trade in this area, trade in this area. Very few people were actually walking all the way from China to Rome, for instance. But it's interesting. Yes.
Xanadu did Kublai Khan. So
right, Xanadu. Then that Xanadu was referring to the name of the Mongol capital. So one thing I was kind of, one point I was making, there's all kinds of influences in this region. So there's Indian influence, there's Persian influence, and because Alexander the Great conquered all the way to this region and then died, there were Greek colonists in this region. So it's kind of an area where all these different cultural contacts are interacting with each other. And then the Chinese sort of dominate this area for a time also. So you have Chinese, Indian, Iranian. You see here it says the Battle of Talas. That was a major battle in the mid-8th century. So during that time of the emperor and his favorite consort, Lady Yang, there was a major battle here for control of the region between the Chinese, the Tang Dynasty Chinese, and you might remember in my timeline, the second was the Abbasid Caliphate, and that was a Muslim empire that really became this kind of the center of the world of Islam that extended all the way to Spain. The Abbasid and the Tang, they fought for control of Central Asia. The Abbasid Caliphate completely defeated the Tang, and soon after that, there were major rebellions in China. Soon after that, the Abbasid Caliphate came to dominate Central Asia, and it's at that point that a lot of the peoples that lived in these places like Samarkand and Tashkent, they converted to Islam. But I wanted to read a quote about the Abbasid. Sorry, this is kind of a long quote. Don't worry, it doesn't go on for 10 pages, but it is 2 paragraphs. Just to give an idea of the kind of knowledge and exchange of ideas and religion that often occurs as a result of these empires that I'm discussing here. And this will be true of the Mongols as well. At its height, from the mid-7th to the mid-8th century, the Abbasid Empire was a hothouse for the development of culture. It was the direct inheritor of the Mesopotamian and Persian learning, and by virtue of its central position, it had easy access to the works of the classical Greek and Roman writers, as well as Indian and Chinese wisdom. In the sciences and mathematics, Muslim scholars excelled. A major advance was the concept of zero, most likely learned from the Chinese. The Indians also had that. Arabic numerals replaced the cumbersome Roman, and the hundreds, tens, and units system was developed. There were major advances in plane and spherical trigonometry. One scholar, Al-Khwarizmi, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. I don't speak Arabic, so a native of the oasis town of Khiva, wrote a book entitled Al-Yebra, in parentheses, algebra, and his name Latinized as algorithm gives us today's algorithm. Anyway, it goes on. But that kind of knowledge, it extends all the way to the Mediterranean world and Spain and Portugal, which had been under control of Muslim states as well. So,
Eli, were the Jews safe during this period?
yeah, for the most part, they were one of the protected minorities. They were, known as one of the peoples of the book. And, you might have read about 10th, 11th century Spain. Jews played a major role in Spain during that period before, the Catholic states took over Spain. Actually, it really depended on which sort of caliphate came into power. There were, at the time of Maimonides, I don't have his years off the top of my head, but at the time of Maimonides, he was in Spain and he had to leave Spain because, you know, that one of the Muslim states there, they had a different view. You either convert or die. That's usually a good sign that it's time to leave. But I want to mention just briefly this other figure who came out of Central Asia, Avicenna, whose real name was Ibn Sina, and he was this kind of major knowledge figure in, you know, we're just kind of jumping forward in time a bit. He lived at the end of the 10th century. But so Ibn Sina, and how Ibn Sina became Avicenna when it reaches the European world, it might be one of those things where you say Ibn Sina 10 times fast and it becomes Avicenna. Anyway, Avicenna is the Latinized name. He's this major physician, astronomer, philosopher. He's like known as the father of modern medicine. But he was came out of that same Silk Road world that I was talking about. And in that world that he was growing up, Greek thought, Indian thought, it was like all these different cultures were kind of merging together there, but he became a major scholar of Aristotle as well. And even though he's coming from Central Asia, so, you know, so far away from the Spanish world where Maimonides was, his thought already influenced heavily by ancient Greek thought, Aristotle. It not only influenced figures like Moses, the Jewish thought of Moses Maimonides, who also incorporates Aristotle in his thinking, but also had a big influence on Jewish mysticism. Sorry, I have to jump ahead. And I already mentioned this, but there were also Jews living along the Silk Road as well. And one thing I had posted this an article in the Facebook group a while ago. Maybe some of you on the Facebook group noticed this, but going back to the, I guess it was the early 2000s, there were about 100 documents written by a Jewish family that were discovered in an Afghan cave. And it's interesting where the cave was. It was in Bamiyan, which you might remember going back to 2001, I think it was. Somebody like Peter could look that up. There was the giant Buddha in a cave, you know, kind of it was carved. I would have added this image, but I already had way too many slides in this PowerPoint. But you might recall this, the Taliban in Afghanistan, they blew up this gigantic Buddha that was chiseled out of the face of the cliff. And this was this ancient Buddha going back to the 6th century. And the Taliban blew that up. It sort of went against their very restricted interpretation of Islam, very different from the interpretation going back to the Abbasid Caliphate, where you know, there was such an explosion of different. That was probably the wrong word, explosion, because they exploded the Buddha. But there was such a kind of mixing of different cultures during the Abbasid Caliphate. When we get to the Taliban, much more restricted view that couldn't bear the possibility of a giant Buddha there, and they blew up the Buddha. But after that, there was this discovery in that same area of in a cave of these Jewish documents, and they were written in Aramaic, Hebrew, Persian, Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Persian. There are at least 100 documents there. That was known as the came to be known as the Afghan Geniza. So that's a reference to the Cairo Geniza, which was like the storage of, I mean, many more documents. There were, I think, hundreds of thousands of different Jewish documents there. But the Afghan Geniza, these were documents associated with one Jewish family that lived along the Silk Road in the 11th century. So that's just one example. Famous Jews of the Silk Road are the Bukharan Jews. And remember that area, that's where this dance known as the Sogdian Whirl flourished. And I don't know, that image you see, I don't know if that's probably not the Sogdian Whirl. That's just a book I found, Silk Road Adventures Among the Jews of the Caucasus and Central Asia. So maybe something to read for the book club. And that brings us to Rumi. So now we're finally back to the Whirling Dervishes. The Whirling Dervishes, that became so associated with this dance. That was a Sufi order that was founded, known as the Mevlevi order. I don't have a lot to say about the order. I'm not an expert on them. But Rumi was the founder of the Mevlevi order. And he was born along the Silk Road. He was born in an Afghan town, but as a child, the family moved to none other than Samarkand, which remember that was the kind of the center of the Sogdian people, this Persian-speaking people that, going back to the Tang Dynasty, the 8th century, they kind of dominated, or they were the main traders in these, in those kind of Silk Road oasis towns. But anyway, Rumi, he came from that same area. He, as the founder of the this order that comes to be known as the Whirling Dervishes. And I like this quote from Rumi, just because you get the idea of whirling from it. Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. This just a short clip. It's like 3 minutes. A specialist on Rumi and the Whirling Dervishes talking about, well, here.
Sufis are an eclectic
Can you
group
hear?
at the time, and they seem to be a mix of people who are focused on a kind of pious asceticism, so withdrawing from the world, focusing on God, people who are proclaiming rather radical statements about oneness with God and love of God.
The Sufis originated out of a movement that developed in 9th century Baghdad, Iraq. In the early 12th and 13th century, the Sufis,
Particular famous Sufi teachers, began composing love poetry, erotic love poetry that was often seen as a metaphor for the relationship between a servant and God. And one of the most famous and greatest poets,
his name was Rumi. He had a higher love for God, and he was a poet of joy and of love. He composed his poetry in Persian. His poetry also became so influential that the people of the area called him our master, Mevlana.
Rumi himself, during his lifetime, was interested in this practice which is known as sama, which usually means a bodily movement that is prompted in response to either poetry or music, and which is meant to focus to empty the mind and refocus it on God.
According to Rumi, the Sema ritual presents the solar system and the planets that revolve around the sun as they create new worlds and make contact with eternity. The dance separates the mind from the body, implying the soul's freedom.
Teacher comes out, followed by his disciples wearing cloaks. And as the music starts up, one by one, the disciples shed their overcloaks and step out onto the wooden floor, and they turn on their left foot, and they're wearing long robes that spin out around them as they turn. And they have one arm pointed towards the earth and one arm pointed towards the heavens, which is sometimes said to symbolize the idea that humans have spiritual essences that are enmeshed in the material plane.
The dance trains the dervishes' perception and awareness. It's a kind of meditation where consciousness can access the metaphysical world. This creates a relationship between the human and the divine,
so that they can return to God and hopefully ultimately merge with God. And the final goal of that path is often called annihilation, the extinction of one's self, one's ego, one's conscious awareness of individuality in God, in the sense that there is nothing but God.
Hopefully you all heard that. There was a poem of Rumi's that they showed. I wanted to stop the video, but I think something with the laser pointer, I couldn't stop the video, but I can come back to that later. It's a really beautiful poem. So we talked about the Tang Empire, sorry, sometimes when I'm giving a talk, I say things. The Abbasid Empire. Now the Mongols, they eventually conquer the Abbasid Empire. The Tang, they're already long gone. I can't say a lot about the Mongols now, but I would like to put in a plug. I will be, this fall, I'm teaching a new class about the Mongol Empire. And I have, so this isn't an infomercial that you're part of. I'm just mentioning it now. As part of that, my students will be working with the Global Village Museum to make their first online exhibit, and it will be called Genghis Khan and the Empire He Created. But I will also, in December, as part of that, I'll be giving a talk through Osher if anybody's interested. But just briefly, the year after Rumi was born, so Rumi was born in the year before he was born in 1207. The year before that, this guy named Temujin from Mongolia, he became known as, any guesses? Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan. And he ended up conquering this very area, not only where Rumi was from, but remember Tashkent? That was the famous place known for the Sogdian world. So he conquered this area already in Genghis Khan's lifetime. Rumi's family was living in Samarkand here. Sorry, it's blurry. And Rumi, he and his family, they ended up moving all the way west to Anatolia and what's now known as Turkey. And in a place, he and that order that he founds, the Mavlevi order, the whirling dervishes, their kind of base becomes this city known as Konya, which was, that's really the Ottoman capital before the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, renamed it Istanbul. But so that's just really, the main thing I'll mention about the Mongols. So Rumi, this figure, the founder of the Whirling Dervishes, he's born at the same time that the Mongols are kind of, I mean, he's born and growing up at this time that the Mongols are conquering so much of Asia and the Middle East, creating what was the largest transcontinental empire in history. And probably as a result of that, the family, along with a lot of Turks who originated north of the Chinese world, they kind of moved westward to what's now Turkey. So the Turks didn't originate in Turkey. They originated really in the same area where the Mongols came from. So anyway, and you might be thinking, oh, that's too big of a leap that this dance spread all the way from, Central Asia to Turkey. Just one example, and this was something I added very recently, this slide about the spread of certain food as a result of the Mongols or the Mongol Empire. And I'll just read this. I think I'm almost at the end. Stuffed boiled dumplings in the Mongol Empire, 1200 to 1350. Contemporary stuffed dumplings with dozens of different names and minor variations in preparation map onto the former extent of the Mongol Empire. They all have a wheat dough wrapper, which was sometimes leavened in China. You might know of jiaozi, in Japan, gyoza, a filling of meat, usually lamb and onions, and a pleated seal. Although scholars still debate the origin and etymology of these dumplings, it is clear that the Pax Mongolica, so the Mongolian Empire, shaped the geography of their diffusion. Pierogi, which I've had them not just with cheese filling, but pierogi, that's in Eastern Europe, in Poland. The Japanese gyoza was a later adoption from China. The relations with baked or fried dumplings called sambusak and samosa, you're probably familiar with samosa at Indian restaurants, and with ravioli are unclear. But anyway, they show mantou, that's a Chinese steamed bun. It's basically like a Chinese bread. And anyway, this is just showing the whole Mongol Empire and all the areas where they conquered. You have similar kinds of stuffed dumpling type things. Raviolis a little further. So similar kind of connection that I'm making with the dance. In the post-Mongol world, you have these different empires. The Russian Empire, 18th century, that kind of really emerges out of the collapse of the Mongols. But I just wanted to show this because you see how close the Russian Empire comes into contact with the Ottoman Empire. The Sufism became very popular throughout the Ottoman Empire. It was supported by Ottoman courts, but it really, they connect the Ottoman Empire and this vast Russian Empire. And before the Russian Empire conquered it, what was known as the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the southern part of that, there was this movement at the end of the 18th century, again, in what's now the Ukraine, this movement known as, yes, the last loosest connection that I will make, the Hasidic movement in the southern part of the Ukraine, not too far away from what was the Ottoman world. And this is just showing the major centers of the Hasidic movement. All these dots, these were major Hasidic centers going back to the early 19th century. Once this region has already been incorporated into the Russian Empire, the northern part of what was the Polish-Lithuanian world, completely opposed to the Hasidic movement, so that where a lot of my ancestors came from, great deal of opposition to the Hasidic movement. And why was that? So what was the Hasidic movement? And again, I'm not really a specialist on Hasidism, but one thing that's interesting in contemporary society, we often think of, I mean, you often hear Hasidic Jews as being ultra-Orthodox Jews, but if you go back to the 18th and early 19th century, it was kind of a revolutionary movement that traces back to this figure, the Baal Shem Tov. He was living before the Russian Empire took over this region, kind of known as a wonder worker. But he stressed this, almost like the Sufis in my view, he stressed this connection with God through dance and music and joy. And, you know, especially for those further to the north who were opposed to the Hasidic movement, they often looked at the Hasids as almost being intoxicated with this, you know, religious fervor, where in places like Vilna, the Jewish experience defined a lot more by the yeshivas and study of Talmud. For the Hasidic movement, again, there's this focus on dance and music, and there is a number of different quotes. Let me see if I could. So this is a story about the Baal Shem Tov, which I could end with. Let me see if I can bring it up.
Eli,
Yes,
do you have any idea when the Hora began?
I do not know that. Maybe after Lynn or Natalie can fill us in on that. But just this story about the Baal Shem Tov, who lived 1698 to 1760. The founder of the Hasidic movement was once asked, why is it that Hasidim burst into song and dance at the slightest provocation? Is this the behavior of a healthy, sane individual? The Baal Shem Tov responded with a story. Once a musician came to town, a musician of great but unknown talent. He stood on a street corner and began to play. Those who stopped to listen could not tear themselves away, and soon a large crowd stood enthralled by the glorious music, whose equal they had never heard. Before long, they were moving to its rhythm, and the entire street was transformed into a dancing mass of humanity. A deaf man walking by wondered, has the world gone mad? I'm reminded a little of the movie Fame, but why are the townspeople jumping up and down, waving their arms, and turning in circles in the middle of the street? Hasidim, concluded the Baal Shem Tov, are moving by the melody that issues forth from every creature in God's creation. If this makes them appear mad to those with less sensitive ears, should they therefore cease to dance? Anyway, I don't have a final answer. The connection between the Hasidic movement and Sufism, and the connection between this whirling dance and the well, that sure looks like a whirling dance here of in this image. But I will leave it there. I somehow was able to fit in all of my slides into the hour. I think I will unmute everybody. I was going to play the scene from The Chosen, where the famous Jew Rod Steiger is dancing. Is that the horror? I'm not sure. But there is this scene where they're all dancing in a circle. If you've seen the movie The Chosen, which is available for free on Prime if you have Prime. So the last thing I'll say, I'm going to unshare my screen, but this kind of music and dance also associated with I think he's the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And he has a lot of several different quotes about music and dance and the experience of God. But when I was looking for videos about Rabbi Breslov or Braslov, or Rabbi Nachman, apparently in Israel there is a kind of new Hasidic movement that really focuses on dance. They're called like the Nachman dancers, but it's like a very current happening. I'm trying to stop share. And I will stop the YouTube live stream.